Welcome to the Project Endure podcast, the place where we talk about life, endurance, persistence, perspective, and so much more. I'm Joe Rinaldi, and I'll be your host. Let's jump in. Before we get started, let me just say that we get it. Personal development can be hard, but you don't have to do it alone. Project Endure has been on a mission to create a supportive and inspiring community of people, all striving to be better together. Head down to the link in the show notes and join the Hard Things Club so that we can do hard things together. And if you're already a member, invite a friend and spread the love. Now, let's get to the episode. Welcome back to the Project Endure podcast, episode 145. We have myself, Joe Rinaldi, and we have a very, very special guest in North Carolina, Dustin Riedesel. Dustin, how are you, man?
Joe, I'm doing great, man. Thanks for having me on here. It's a pleasure.
Of course, it's an honor to have you. And I have to say, you did an excellent job of helping me pronounce your last name. And so if you don't mind, I'd love for you to introduce yourself to the audience and explain to them how you explained to me how to pronounce your last name.
Yeah, the enunciation. So Dustin from Raleigh, North Carolina, as mentioned. And if you were to say my last name, imagine that I have two twin corgi dogs, and their names are Hazel and Basil Riedesel. So you see the name, and it's just like a jumbled mess of vowels, and it seems to help people.
At what point throughout your life did you realize you needed to come up with a story like that to help people?
Oh gosh, I don't know. Probably when me and my older brother were arguing about how to pronounce our own name. He's like giving me some sort of like German linguistics lesson, and I'm like, but that's not how Dad says it. So
amazing. Well, so we got the last name down. Why don't you tell the audience a little bit about who you are, and I'll let you do that however you'd like.
Yeah. It's always tough to know where to start here, but when I introduce myself to people and they ask me what I do, I tell them I'm a writer. Now, does that make the lump sum of my income? Not even close. I work for a Fortune 50 company, Cisco Systems. It is an incredible company to work for, and I couldn't be luckier to have that job. I'm not trying to dodge that, but I kind of got fed up with the what do you do question instead of the who are you question. And so I just cut to the chase. The thing that I am most passionate about outside of my kids and my wife is my writing. It's what I love. And so I recently wrote a book called Looks Like We're Running. And I decided I wanted to share that story with as many people as possible because, excuse me, it's the story for me of surviving cancer, going to rehab, and I even hesitate to use the word overcome, but getting a handle on my alcohol abuse. And it's the best job I could do of telling a story about the tools I used to change from feeling bad to feeling better. And so, who am I? What do I do? I'm a husband, a father, I'm a writer, and I'm a runner. And that's honestly like 90% of the stuff. The rest of it's between the ears, and I've got tons of interest and just a massive amount of curiosity. But I think a lot of the things that the nexus points in my life, they're around the times when things were the worst, and that was leukemia and addiction. And to tell that story really explains who I am. So
I have so many questions, and possibly the best place to start is with the question I ask every guest. And I'll let you run with that question. So the question is, what is the hardest thing that you've ever had to handle that you did not get to choose for yourself? And you can give me more than one answer.
Well, it's funny. The answer to that question, if I'm technical, is probably leukemia. You're just going along through life. And for me, the way I found out I had cancer, it was the weekend before my wedding. We were supposed to be married on December 3rd, 2016. I'm 31 years old. And I scratched an ingrown hair on my left thigh. Didn't think anything of it. I was at a urinal. I saw it there. I just scratched the top of it off. And within 24 hours, I'm in like a full-blown fever. That ingrown hair looks like a spider bite. I decide I can sleep it off. I go through one night and I can't break the fever. I wake up the next morning, I can barely walk. Now the spider bite looks like somebody ran over my leg with a car. It is black and blue up and up, all over my thigh. Uh, Fiance takes me into the urgent care. Urgent care doesn't even blink. They send me directly to the ER. I'm there for, I don't know, 10 hours. By the time they leave, I'm so hopped up on morphine and whatever else, like it's a blur. They ship me up to University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, that has like a big cancer ward up there. And I don't taste fresh oxygen for 33 more days. I'm in the ICU for 7. I'm in the ward for whatever the remainder of that 33 minus 7 is. And and I do 10 months of chemo after that. And the reason I say that over the addiction is that truly felt like a genetic injustice. I've met now hundreds of people who have been diagnosed with cancer. Me and my wife do a 24-hour rowathon. We get about 30 people. We keep a rowing machine, uh, a concept two going for 24 hours. Uh, and we raise a bunch of money for Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, and we stayed plugged into that community. And you realize there's no rhyme or reason, right? It just happens to some people. And so I had no hand in that. And in some ways, it was one of the best things that ever happened to me. I make the joke all the time. Forget about premarital cancer or forget about premarital counseling. Premarital cancer is the ticket, man. You get that, you have been through the fire. Like you know that you are for each other.
Mm.
And so that is the technical answer to the question, but I think the pivot on that, why I answer that with a caveat, is to me, as tough as cancer was and as scary as it was, it doesn't hold a candle to trying to shake alcoholism. That was way tougher.
So, before we dive into the alcoholism piece, tell me this: when you got diagnosed with cancer, um, it sounds like the week before or the week of your wedding, right around that
Mm.
timeline. What was going through your mind in that moment? Because clearly you've had a chance to step back, reflect on this experience, and form a perspective around it. But in those moments in the hospital, what were you feeling and experiencing?
Yeah, it's a crazy collection of emotions because there were certainly nights, particularly in the ICU, the state of my body, I couldn't sleep, I couldn't get comfortable. And I remember one night in particular, I'm laying there, everyone's gone. I had a great support system, but now it's just me. The only person is there, like Katie laying on her, that's my wife, laying on her bed of chairs that she has fashioned together. And I I felt adrift. I felt like the regrets of my life had piled up on me in that moment because I really didn't know, like, if I fall asleep, am I gonna wake up again? I couldn't move. My body was swollen to like 40 pounds. It's typical weight. My white blood cells didn't work at all. I'm purely existing on just like a cycle of new blood they're replacing every few hours. And the doctors didn't have answers at that time. They didn't know how they were going to treat it yet. And I just felt like a gap between the person I was and the person I wished to be. And you didn't expect the end of your life to rush up on you that quickly. And so it's funny you mentioned that. I don't revisit that moment in my mind very often. The thing I usually tell people is, because I lean to be more positive, is I have become pretty obsessed with the concept of those last 15 seconds of my life.
Mm.
And I think about Kobe Bryant in the helicopter all the time. And like with his daughter there, especially, like, was he able to summon up courage and gratification in those final moments so that he didn't like face the end with fear?
Mm.
And so that, even though I don't talk about it very often, that fear and that being confronted in that deathbed, it does make me do a self audit I run almost every single day. Uh, which is, I just ask myself three questions. I think they're the ones that matter when, if I want to have peace of mind at the end of my life, which is, did I try my best? Did I make wise decisions? Did I treat others well? And for me, that's a recipe of strong, smart, and kind. That's the exact thing I teach my kids. We put our hands in the middle. We do a one, two, three. We do a little breakdown, and strong, smart, kind. And I think that that's like the recipe for a life well lived. And it will look a little different to everybody, right? Some people like lifting, some people like running, some people like writing. Some people, it's just about being completely out there in the charity. And those three pie slices, if you will, they fluctuate depending on a person's personality and what they need. Are they introverted, extroverted, right? But you'll find those three ingredients in every respectable life. And I think if you're missing one of them, the other two are typically tragically misplaced. You
Mm.
know, it's not enough when you get to the end of it all to be like, hey, 2 out of 3 ain't bad. That's not the way the human mind works. You will be fixated on the regret of the one you left behind. So that's what that moment was for me. It was terrifying in the moment, and now it's become like a rallying point to understand how to live every day.
Man, that is so beautiful. And it brings to mind a quote from a book titled Wintering, from Catherine May. And I'll read a couple sentences and then we'll talk about it. But she wrote, "If happiness is a skill, then sadness is too. Perhaps through all those years at school, or perhaps through other terrors, we are taught to ignore sadness, to stuff it down into our satchels and pretend it doesn't exist there. As adults, we often have to learn to hear the clarity of its call. That is wintering. It is the active acceptance of sadness. It is a practice of allowing ourselves to feel it as a need. It is the courage to stare down the worst parts of our experience and to commit to healing them the best we can." And
Mm.
I'm wondering if that moment of sadness and feeling those regrets pile up on top of you and coming close to death and having the uncertain experience of when that was going to happen or if that was going to happen, did that make you the person you are today in any way? Did that force you to heal and become the person you are today?
It hugely informed it.
Mm.
The way I have described this to people. Sorry about that. The way I've described this to people is, I think a lot of people have a similar trajectory in life. Like, what that nexus point is of the time that was really tough is almost immaterial. Like, I heard you telling a story on it was Reagan Sykes,
Mhm.
and I thoroughly enjoyed that podcast. And you told a story about when you were in college and you're looking in the mirror and you have like 5% body fat and you're like, I need to be skinnier. And all that did was it pointed to an imbalance in your life and unhappiness. And it, I think that what you were doing, you were obviously working really hard. You can't get to that point without being extremely committed. So, what usually happens to people from my perspective, I break it down kind of into three phases. I think everybody kind of starts off like imagine you're in a boat and you just kind of drift along. The currents take you where they will. And at some point in your life, you have a realization like, I did not mean to be here. You know, maybe you're a little overweight, maybe you're way too underweight, right? Like maybe maybe you hate your job, maybe you're with the wrong person, or maybe you're the wrong person, right? And at some point, something wakes you up to that. And look, I certainly had enough signs prior to the cancer that I was adrift. And I think the cancer and the fear in that moment just made me have to accept it. You can't run from this anymore. It's the end of the line. And I think acceptance and self-acceptance about your weaknesses and what's wrong with you is a pivotal moment. And what most people will try to do, and I mean, I'm just venturing a guess, but this sounds like what a guy at 5% body fat is probably doing. Most people enter the second phase of this. I was adrift. I'm going to get out the oars and I'm going to row like hell. I am going to forcibly make something of myself. I'm going to get to where I need to be. And that is effective up to a point. And that's what I started doing at that time. I once I got out of the hospital, I made all these vows to myself about how I was going to like carpe diem, I was going to do it all. And yet I didn't really make the important changes I needed to make. So um there were the days of being out drinking late and getting up even earlier to run. And I was just burning it at both ends. And like I made big vacation plans and like went on those vacations and partied hard there and still tried to like, oh, I need to be in shape. I need to value this body I have. And eventually I ran into like, there's a version of this in everything. It's the overtraining injury. And for me, I got a DUI. It wasn't my first, but the ones prior were when I was younger. And I've been married for maybe 6 months at that point. And that's I can't speak for every wife, but that's not what mine signed up for. And so she drew a hard line and it was like, and she knew me. She knew I wanted to be more. And spent a ton of money and went out to a nice rehab place for 30 days. The nice thing about a giant company like Cisco is you can take medical leave for these sorts of things. So I took 30 days medical leave, went out. Is a lot of money, but how much is your life worth, right? So I would recommend to anybody if you have an obvious obstacle in your life, a lot of people talk about doubling down on your strengths. If you get rid of the worst weaknesses, your strengths are going to be so free to breathe. It's like the which wolf do you feed analogy. Like just get rid of that other wolf altogether. There's plenty of food. And I would say that was from the time I got diagnosed with cancer and felt that fear in the deathbed to the point that I emerged from rehab, that was my period of rowing like hell. And getting out of rehab and taking that time off, like, hey, stop rowing. You need to do some deep analysis. Stop trying to be something else. Start learning to accept yourself and try to figure out who you actually are. And the crazy part about that story, these things always seem to come at me in twos, right? A wedding and cancer. On the back end of this, my wife thought she had miscarried while I was in rehab. We had been trying prior. The day she picks me up, I get in the car and she unrolls a strip of sonogram photos, and it's the very first time I've ever seen my son. And no matter what you believe about God, no God, like that can't be anything but a sign, right? Like it is time to right the ship. And so for me that signaled the third phase. And the third phase, like, okay, I was adrift. I tried rowing like hell. I need to figure out what this wind and this water is that's all around me. And how the heck am I going to harness it to get to where I need to be? Because rowing like hell didn't work. Just drifting around didn't work. And what I've come to learn is that kids are a great example of this. But even the person you randomly meet and decide to like hitch your life to is this. The wind and the waves are the unexpected variables that God, fate, chance puts in our life. And it is the people who can learn to harness the unexpected variables who will recognize the ceiling in their life. I didn't plan on this thing. What does it mean? Let me make the most of it. And so, long answer to a short question, but that has been that was the turning point in my life when I got out of that when I got out of that rehab. It was like less than 2 weeks later, I was signed up for the Chicago Marathon. And my plan for life was simply this. I had a mirror. I had three sticky notes that I replaced every day. And those sticky notes were simply a tally. And it was miles run, hours of group therapy or AA done. Uh, and I forget what the third one was, but it quickly less important. Oh, is words written. I was trying to write 200,000 words. Like I just need to spend time on that. And very quickly the 200,000 words got obliterated. It was like, well, hey, great, I got
Mm.
there. Uh, and that was it. Like, stop trying to row so hard. Be good at these three things. Pay attention to your family, and I was amazed at the unexpected variables that the winds and the tide blew my way.
Mm. If we were to go back in time, just because I'm wondering where this started, do you remember your first drink?
Yeah, yeah, I do. It was pretty monumentous, actually. Uh, we so I played high school football. When I was a freshman, my older brother and his friends won the state championship, and I had a lot of friends that had brothers in his class. So it's like all our older brothers did it. Okay, that's what we're working towards. I it's pretty big. I mean, we were a 5A high school out in Kansas. It's Friday Night Lights mentality. Thought it was the most important thing in the world. And we is our sophomore year of high school. A buddy, his older brother had a party at their house, and somehow they had drank every beer they had except one. There was an empty fridge with one single beer that's sitting in the back. And I didn't drink that beer then. The guy's mom walked in, looked at all of us guys like laughing about like, how did you leave one beer? It's like the last slice of pizza. And she took a post-it note and said, "Do not open until state 2003." It's like, I'm gonna keep this beer in the fridge. You boys could have it if you win state championship. So fast forward several years, I was totally like out on drinking. We won the state championship that night. The very first drink I had was that beer was opened around and passed between like 10 of us as like, and it was kind of a cool moment, I have to say. Uh, we had set it there. We'd seen it every time we went over to our buddy's house and opened it, and we did it. And thousands of other guys wanted to beat us, but we beat them.
Mm.
And I think part of the camaraderie and the triumph of that really rolled into me feeling like this was a special thing, right? And from then on, I didn't really give it much thought. It was just something I really enjoyed doing. And in I mean, hell, you know this. Enough other people do it. You don't have trouble finding people to hang with. And so I went on to play basketball in college. It was a little part of that culture too. And I don't know, by the time I was 21, it was a full-blown deal. If I could get my hands on it, I was in.
And so we'll go back to rehab, and I'm wondering if that's the hardest thing that you've ever done on purpose is voluntarily going to rehab, going through that process and getting sober, staying sober, or if there's something else in your life that you've done on purpose that's been even harder.
No, it's that. It's that. I mean, look, it's a different type of hard. I think the physically for me, the last 8 miles of a marathon is always the hardest physical thing I do. I
Mhm.
break down. I'm just in pure suffer mode, and it's just like a battle between the ears. But the difficulty about an addiction, if it's really an addiction, is that two things are simultaneously true. It's that you 100% want to quit and you 100% don't want to quit. And those two things shouldn't be able to coexist, but they will always be true until you just spend enough time disengaged with the activity. The first thing you got to do is like dry out, just like get enough hours under your belt of not being inebriated, of not having the toxin. And I'm sure that's true for other drugs as well. This one just happens to be mine. And then you have to do all the therapeutic stuff to unravel, why did I need this? I didn't pick it up because it wasn't serving me, right? They say this all the time. At some point, it was doing something for me. And so I had to unravel a lot about what gave me self-esteem. And that was a long process. And it's not one that holds fast. It's not like, I another analogy I use pretty frequently, this one typically with my teams at work, but some you come to let's use the analogy of a river. You've been traveling and you come to a river and this is difficult to cross, and how are we going to get across it? There are some problems. It's not worth building an apparatus. Forget a bridge. Just swim. Just get through it. Like just get to the other side and move on. But there are some problems where this thing is so big and we need to take so much of our personality across the obstacle that I need to build a massive bridge. And that's what I had to do to get to the person I wanted to become. I had to put a lot of work into building up my self-esteem again and my relationship with myself instead of running away from, I don't know, a litany of insecurities is really what it was. And the problem with that is this bridge is not it is not eternal. It is constantly breaking down. I constantly have to repair it.
Mm.
And I have to travel across it routinely. And so that's been the hardest thing by far because and I've had moments, I've had days where I've gotten drunk again. And for the week after that, I feel so lost. I feel so, and for at least for a couple days, I feel like I'm never gonna be me again. And it's a strange thing to have to feel so sure about who you are, and then because you tripped up on something you don't want to do, to feel so separated from the identity. And it gives you this a little bit of fear that maybe your sense of self is really fragile. And so that one's been the hardest by far because it can be it's kind of a sleeping giant. You'll be good for 10 months. And the wrong thing happens. Somebody says something that hits you the right way and it coincides with an opportunity where no one's going to know. And now you got to see what you're really made of. Did you believe in this, or was it just convenient? Did you just build a life where you didn't have to confront the problem again? And
Mm.
uh and the for the first couple years I was building convenience. And it's really only been the last couple years where I feel pretty sure. I get scared of the word certain, but 90%.
If you had to go deep into the recesses of your mind and go back to a time where you were pretty sure of who you were, what you stood for, what you wanted, and then the circumstances were just right where, you weren't feeling your best, nobody would know, and you had that opportunity to drink. You had the opportunity for convenience to fall back into that old pattern, but you didn't. how
Hmm.
how do you talk to yourself in those moments? How do you overcome that? Because whether it's alcohol or something else, right? I think that's something a lot of people can relate to. I
Hmm.
would argue everybody on some level. And so how do you win those moments? What does that sound like?
Yeah, it's changed over the years. I remember one. This was hilarious, actually. Uh, this was one I won, so maybe I'm subconsciously leaning towards this because, like, hey, I'll sound good here. But it was the very first time out of rehab that my wife was leaving overnight. Not just be home. She was taking the baby with her. It would just be me. Actually, she was pregnant at the time, so it was just me anyway. And as she's leaving, I put on a bunch of stuff. Like, I'm gonna go for a run. I feel like that'll be a good way to like start things, and I'll be better that way. I'm running through this park, and I kid you not, it had just snowed. I realize I have to pee about a half mile in. I peel off into the woods and completely unopened. I don't know why it was there. Lodged in the snow was a 6 pack of Bud Light, completely full. And similar to the sonogram, I was like, it was so on the nose. It actually strengthened me. I was like, this couldn't be more set up to be like, hey, you don't even have to do anything. And so it was so on the nose that I just kept on running. And I called my wife and told her about it. And it got me thinking. I told the guys at the AA group the very next morning I went and I told them about it. And it was funny. Even a room that's like completely supposed to support you, like half of the guys in there were like, "Oh, I'd have been done." It's like no way. And
Mm.
so there's a story I tell in that's in the book about a failure I had during a marathon training. And it's funny because like I've set this up as if the times when you're down are the times that it chirps at you the worst. Your addiction chirps at you. But I was out with some buddies from college. I kind of intentionally acted like I had more of an open relationship to alcohol than I did at home. I was like, no, just can't touch it. And I've led some of them to believe that it was like, well, occasionally, I just don't do it the same as I used to. And so when I got there, it was just like, oh, it's good to see you guys. Like, yeah, it's fine. I'll have a couple. And I'm up till like 4 a.m. And the next morning I try to get up and go run. I'm like 2 miles in. I'm sitting on the curb in Lexington, Kentucky, just like, what is wrong with you, dude? What happened? And to answer your question about what runs through the head, intention there, this is what it is. There is on the surface, you look like you're just making decisions like anybody else. But for the addict, in a situation where they could, in my case, drink and they can get away with it, your addiction in your brain gets super noisy. It is clamoring. And if you continuously go all night and just kind of like don't acknowledge it, you ignore it, it will not go away. It will bother you all night long. And so the appealing thing about giving in, it happens instantly. The moment you give in, say like, "Hey, I'll have a drink," that clamoring hushes. completely silent, and you are immediately in that moment. It's like, oh, I don't have to confront this battle any longer. It's a huge relief. And so, the thing that I've learned in time is, and this is part of why I put it in the book, this is why I talk about it openly now. If I don't think I can get away with it, if I think people will judge me, that clamoring voice is not very loud. And so now it's like I try to let people know about it. I don't want to be like a person that makes it a centerpiece of my life. Like, hey, if I talk to Dusty, he's got to talk about not drinking. Like so I think a lot of people are unaware. But if I know I'm going to be in situations, I need to have somebody that I've told so that I don't have that roar in the back of my head start.
Mm,
And as long as I told them myself ahead of time and I got like somebody in the foxhole who's aware of my situation, it becomes 100 times easier. And I'm not 100% sure why that external component makes you so much stronger internally, but I
mm,
know that it does.
mm. I think you hit something there. I think a lot of times the secrets we keep to ourselves end up becoming a weakness. And
Mm,
I think that those things that we all have that we try to hide from the world, they have less of a hold on us when we bring them to the light.
hmm.
And I think that's also really scary for a lot of people is to talk about those things, because if they talk about them openly or they share them with somebody, it means that there's less of an excuse, less of a chance that it'll happen.
Yeah,
And
you
there's a,
lose it.
yeah, yeah. So I'm curious for you, right? That battle internally between drinking, not drinking, giving in, staying strong, that has to carry over to running for you. And I would love to hear how that carries over to running, and how you've developed a stronger mindset through running as well.
Well, you've talked to enough runners and have done enough running yourself. You know this. What's that run streak at now? Anyways,
Today was 618 days. Yeah.
yeah, man, like you're so deep in it. So so you know that, I apologize. I write a letter to my kids every year on their birthday. It's like a 2 to 5,000 word essay, and like I want them to see. It makes me invested in them more, but I also want them to see my progression over time. I want them to know me in a way that, like, yeah, I can't tell them about it years later. They got to catch it in the moment. And it's funny. One of the things, I happen to be writing my daughter's first birthday letter 2 days, like wrapping it up 2 days before I was running a marathon. So of course all the writing was about the running. And I apologized to her in the letter because, like, this is the hackiest thing on earth. I'm about to compare life to a race. It's like everybody's done it. Like I think that's in the Bible. They're comparing the life to races. It's been done for thousands of years. And so of course I see a million parallels, but I think the one that I talk about the most often, and this is the way I describe running, but it is pretty true for a lot of things. I think it's the prime thing that running gives us is that when you feel a little bit of the resistance when you're just getting ready for a run. Okay, am I going to do this or am I not? And if you win that battle between the years, I think somebody said that recently, limitless potential. Uh, if you win that battle between the ears, you can get out there. But for me, the time it is most obvious is when you're on the back end of a long run. I think a distance run is, in particular, it's very different than when you're just trying to do something for speed. And at some point, everything else in the exhaustion, everything else is faded away. You don't care about your job. You don't care about what people think about you. You only care about two things. It's like, am I going to be the person who quits, or am I going to be the person who keeps going? Your whole identity is boiled down to those two options. And to be a person who constantly decides to keep going, who accepts that the pain is part of the process, that translates to almost any activity. And somewhere along the lines, somewhere along the line, when I got comfortable telling people I was a runner without too much embarrassment, because like I don't look like it. I'm built like a tight end. I'm like 6'4", 220. It's just somewhere when I got comfortable accepting that, a little bit of the chatter around the drinking too started to subside. And I realized I was building up a, I even hesitate to call it grit because it felt to me much more like acceptance than it did. Uh, it's funny. I was about to say endurance, but to me, like that's kind of the secret of endurance is that it's it's less about just like this is so hard and I don't care that I hate it. I'm going to push through it anyways. It's more about flipping your mind switch to be like, you know what? Actually, I don't hate it.
Mm,
I actually love this. Like at some point you realize the thing that is really heavy is also the thing that is making you strong.
mm,
You know what I mean? My one of my favorite philosophical perspectives, and you may have heard this before, it comes from Albert Camus, and he says you have to imagine Sisyphus happy.
mm,
So, for those who don't know, Sisyphus was the king who stole fire from the gods and was cursed to roll the boulder up the hill. And it's like, we all got that, right? And if you can realize that the hard thing is also the good thing, then you start to create a relationship with yourself that you are proud to continuously do the hard thing. You'll start to look around and you'll see the people who, and I'm using a personal example here, and I don't want this to sound defamatory to people because everybody's where they're at, but you'll see the people who are out of shape and you'll see the people who are drunk, and you will feel a sense of strength that you are no longer part of that crowd.
mm.
And you will turn your focus to new points of comparison in your social sphere and try to be more like these people that you aspire to be. And it changes everything about the goals you create with yourself. And I don't want to ramble on that topic too much, but there's like 80 things on that idea, but like that all sprouts from running. It all starts from that decision to you say this all the time. So now I feel like I'm parroting you, which feels embarrassing. But you always talk about, I think it's on your alarm because you said you would, right?
Mhm,
Like
mhm,
at some point, self-esteem is just trusting yourself,
mhm.
like respecting yourself. And you know better than anybody if you kept your word. I think that's at the heart of like why that on that curb in Lexington, Kentucky, why I'm just sitting there thinking like, man, who the hell are you? Because I let myself down. And for me, that was kind of pivotal that it wasn't like nobody busted me. Nobody caught me. I could have like flown home and nobody would have known. It just felt like I had betrayed myself. And so my self-esteem was at an all-time low. And as long as you can do what you said you would do, which is all a running schedule is, I made the plan, I kept to it. And when I've crossed that first finish line at my first marathon, it really felt like a realization. It's like that I could be the person I hope to become.
That is so beautiful. I think everything you said belongs in a book somewhere if it's not already in yours, right? Um, yeah. And so here's my question, and I'm gonna go a little off script and then we'll come back and wrap things up. But
Yeah.
we've talked about cancer, we've talked about alcoholism, we've talked about running and endurance. I want to start where you began with the introduction, and you introduced yourself as a writer.
Mm.
Not an author, but a writer. And I picked up on that. I'm not sure if you did that on purpose because on the whiteboard behind my computer, I have at the bottom of the whiteboard written writer and then the greater sign author. So writer over author because
Deal.
writing is right. And so I would love to hear what writing means to you, and any big lesson maybe about the world that you've learned through writing.
Dude, you're speaking to my soul with that writer over author thing. You'll see a million authors out there that like they don't really have any relationship with writing, and no shots. Like I said, everybody's where they're at. But for me, because the writing is so sacred, it's hard for me not to take a little offense at the idea of just being an author, right? Uh, so it starts with this. It started extremely basically, which is, I don't know the science behind this, but our thoughts move at roughly 1,000 words per minute, however fast that is. Uh, Probably varies from person to person. And when we speak, we can only speak at about 100, 120 words per minute. It slows us down significantly. And what I tell people in therapy, I prefer group to one-on-one, but what I tell people in group is like, that's the magic of it. You take this big storm and you compress it, and you'll be amazed. Like, I thought this thing was so stressful. And then when I just told the group, I was like, oh, actually, not that big a deal. I think I got it. And it's almost embarrassing the first time you realize that you can shrink your problem just by talking about it. But here's the thing about writing. Even when I'm flying, if I'm coming up with my own thoughts, if I'm doing creative writing, forget like Mavis Beacon 80 words per minute. They come slower because you have to be precise. Mark Twain said it's the difference between lightning and the lightning bug, right? Like you got to get that word perfect. And when I'm typing, even if I'm flying, I get shrunk down to about 20 words per minute. It is the absolute best tool I have for maximizing my human potential because it teaches me how to be a better thinker. And when I when I have taken an idea that is complex, like part of the reason I love these letters with my kids is I'm compressing their year into an essay. And I feel like a close relationship to it because I've thought through the moments. I've chosen the ones that are meaningful. I've tied the themes of like what I see in their personality and how they're developing and what I wish for them. And, I've shared a lot of my own struggles in those letters. And, uh, this is something I got from reading uh, I believe it's called Creativity Inc. It's written by the guy who's the head of Pixar. He talks about a suitcase handle. And what they found is they would have these big ideas about like what they wanted to do with these stories. And it would be unwieldy and they had trouble talking about it. And so what they would try to do is hammer it down to a single sentence that they all agreed on, like, that's it. That's the story. Everything else emanates from that. Because carrying around a big suitcase it's difficult. But all you do is you put a perfect handle on it, and now you can carry it around everywhere. And so what writing does is it takes the most complex issues in my life and it shrinks them down to a handle. And if I have something I want to work through and I write about it, I got it, man. Like I'm able to call that thing back into place years later and usually articulate it with pretty good dexterity. And I think that's why I wanted to write like this particular book. Dude, you know this. I've got probably, I'll bet you it's 20 times what has ever seen the internet or print. That it's probably even more than that, honestly, now I'm thinking about it. That is just like rambles upon rambles. And yet there are things that when you got it, you want to share it with people because the ultimate aim of anything we do, and I think this is really at the heart of the difference between a writer and an author to me. An author has commerce in mind. Like I am going to generate something for myself with this. And I think the writer is doing it purely because they want to enrich others and enrich themselves. And sometimes those things will overlap. They probably frequently overlap. But I try to keep that in mind that if it is not for enrichment, then I don't know what the purpose is. And so if I think I've got something that's really good, I want to find a way to share it. But even when I don't, it is so rewarding. There's, I would say, the goal of my life is right now, besides being the three regret categories I mentioned earlier, is how do I take the work third of my life and turn it into the writing third of my life. It's like right now I can manage about an hour a day, on the weekends more. And man, I would love to write more. Would love it.
And if you have things to share like you've shared in this podcast, I think the world needs to see more of your writing. And I know that you'll find a way to make that happen in due time. And, I think we could both talk about writing for a long time. And for
Well,
the
I do
sake of
have
this,
I
yeah,
know we're almost at time, but I do have a question to you about that because
sure.
obviously you write a lot.
Mhm.
Uh, do you have anything in the works? Like, are you working towards a project or anything
Yeah, it's
that
a
you're
good
able to
question.
share?
Yes. Yeah, yeah. So I've written a chapter in a book that's published, and that was a really great experience.
Yeah.
Not as fulfilling as I thought it would be.
Mm,
And part of that was I got the book, opened it up, looked at my writing in this book, and maybe for a fleeting second there was this feeling of pride. I was excited, all those positive emotions, and then I realized this is really just an edited version of a long blog that I wrote that became a chapter in a book, and it didn't feel any different. It didn't feel special to me.
yeah.
So with that being said, I've had this document, this Google document. I don't know how many thousands, hundreds of thousands of words it is at the moment, but I do intend on writing a book at some point. The title's good. I'll give you that. I can't share it, and I can't tell you when it'll be done, but
Hey,
I
that's
am
fair.
slowly chipping away at it. But like you alluded to, there are so many words, so many pages, so many documents that will never make it out on the internet or in front of anybody else's eyes, at least not on purpose. And that's some of my favorite writing.
Hmm.
It's the journaling in the morning when I'm having a rough start or it's a heavy season of life,
Mm.
and the words are just for me. I think those are actually the words that would be most profound, and someday I'll find a way to share those with the world when it feels right. But yeah, writing is so sacred for me as well, and I appreciate you asking about that.
Well, I hugely respect it. I can't wait to see it. I'd never drag somebody's work out of them before they're ready. It mutates the effort sometimes to let other people into it. But man, I do appreciate what leaks out and what you do share with the world. And so it just makes me excited for when there's more of it, I suppose.
Thank you so much. That really means a lot. And
Sure, man.
with that, I think this conversation has been full of wisdom, full of encouragement for anybody listening. And this last question is always a special one to me. And it's funny because you almost do this. You almost do this last question, it sounds like, for your children every year on their birthdays. But if somebody needed a pick me up, if somebody was going through a hard time, if they needed some encouragement, they didn't know where to go or what to do, and let's say this is one of your children someday and they come to you and
Mm.
they're struggling in a similar or different way to how you've struggled in the past, and they just need some sound guidance and some loving support, what would you say to them in those moments?
Mm. Man, that's a you try so hard to, particularly with children, but I think in general, you try really hard to live a life so that when the pivotal moments come, you'll have something that can help. And I think it obviously depends on the situation. The thing that I've been saying to a lot of people currently is to measure less and relate more. And I find that usually when people are in a state of distress, sometimes it can be a relationship, or they think that somebody got something they should have gotten, or they're not at the place where they hope to be. And usually they're stacking themselves up to some idea that probably isn't fair and probably needs a little bit more definition. And if they can get away from the idea of their life as an achievement and just focus on relating to the people they care most about them, like forget about closing whatever imaginary distance you need to make. Like get out of that achievement mindset and get into the relationships around you. Go go get coffee with a friend. Be a goofball with your kids. Like stop trying to train them, just get silly. And it's amazing how those things that you thought were so important start to melt away and you become reacquainted with the heart of life, which is much more about connection than achievement. And so that's I condense it down to those words, and it has to mutate a little bit depending on everybody's situation, but it's almost always the answer. And it you know, I guess to pivot and put a cherry on this, I think that's what I've really enjoyed about following you over these years is you seem to inherently understand that by not making Project Endure about something that Joe Rinaldi needed to be or achieve. You made it about a community, and it inherently understood that connection was the thing that was ultimately most gratifying about life.
Mhm.
And so I think that's what I'd offer. In a practical sense, I'd hand somebody a pair of Nikes and say, "Let's get you back on your feet." And I'd take them for a long run because somewhere between them getting exhausted, they're going to run out of material and run out of defenses, and we're going to talk about what's really bothering them.
It's so good, man. I have to say, when I have these conversations, oftentimes a word or a phrase will stand out to me as, the title. And it didn't come to me throughout our conversation. And I think that's just a testament to how many amazing things you said. I could use this, I could use that. And the one word that you mentioned a few times, especially when you spoke about writing, and again here at the end, was just condensed, condensing
Mm,
life. And I
yeah.
love that idea of just slowing things down enough, slowing down our thoughts, funneling them through speaking, through writing, and getting them to this condensed state to recognize what matters most. And I would agree 100% with you that relationships and connection are what matter most. And I've spoken about this on the podcast before, and so I won't go into detail, but I was in a car accident in the past and had a near death experience where, you know, 15 seconds felt like 15 hours. And I felt this deep hit in my stomach of sadness, thinking that I was never going to see the people I loved ever again. And that was the
Yeah.
only thought that ran through my mind. I did not think about what I was going to lift at the gym that day and what was in my bank account, what I had to do. The only thing that ran through my mind were people.
Wow.
And I think it's very telling, and your experience in maybe a less condensed version of a near death experience brought you the same awareness.
Man, that to hear you say it that way, that insight is such a gift. And I think I'll try not to re-extend us at all, but have you ever heard of the a poem called "The Guest House" by a poet named Rumi?
I know who Rumi is, but I have not read that poem.
This is really short, so it might be a good way to put it on the end here. So the poem goes like this: This being human is a guest house. Every morning, a new arrival. A joy, a depression, a meanness, some monetary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all, even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture. Still, treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. And when you talk about this is why you're good at this, man. You nailed that condensed thing. That is exactly what I've been trying to do ever since I got out of that hospital. Just trying to like narrow down to the heart of life. And I think if you were just one person, that poem condenses the whole thing. Your whole world is experienced to you as these emotions. Don't
Mm.
shut them out. They are here to guide you. And it's
And
awesome that you found that even in a dark and scary moment.
thank you. Thank you. And thank you for sharing that poem. That's powerful and one that I know I'll revisit. And I hope that this episode is one that people listening will revisit. There were so many parts of this conversation that I needed to hear, and I would venture to guess that other people needed to hear. And so, Dustin, if people want to, one, read your book, I'd love for you to tell them where they could do that. And then two, if they want to follow or connect with you, where they can do that as well.
Yeah, I appreciate that, man. So the book is Looks Like We're Running, an amateur's companion to becoming a marathoner. I'm not your guide here, not an expert, just a friend along the way. And that it's easiest to get at Amazon. Um, you can find the audiobook anywhere audiobooks are sold, and Spotify subscribers can actually stream it with their subscription, which is a great deal. Um, but yeah, you'll find it on any online retailer. And as far as me, uh, same as the name, you'll see it on the podcast at Dustin Riedesel. Instagram is really the only social media I use heavily. I mean, feel free to connect on LinkedIn. That'd be a solid social or solid professional contact, but Instagram's really the way I communicate with the broader world. And so that's the best place at Dustin Riedesel.
Great. Well, I'll link everything below so it's easy to access. And Dustin, I just want to thank you again for this conversation, for the light you are in this world, and for all the kind words that you threw my way through the conversation. You made my night, and I can't wait for the world to hear this one.
Well, man, the pleasure is all on this end of the video screen. And dude, you're every morning I wake up to the cup of Joe and you get me going. So it's just like I appreciate you out there doing what you're doing. Keep going, man. I really respect it a lot and been an honor to be here.
Thank you, Dustin. It's been a privilege to have you. If you enjoyed this episode of the Project Indoor podcast, go ahead and subscribe, leave a review on your platform of choice, and share this episode with a friend. It helps us get more conversations like this out to more people like you. We appreciate you, and we'll talk to you next time. And one more thing. If you're looking for a community of people all striving to be better together, check out the Project Indoor Hard Things Club. The link is in the description below. We'd love to have you.